Morning, everyone. So, several things. We're going to discuss the latest on the Rwanda plan, which is just getting more and more insane. Would you believe it? But first of all, just to know, polling day today. So, if you're in the UK, well, actually, I say the UK, if you're in England or Wales, go out and vote if you haven't already. I went out and voted this morning. I took my fiance, who wouldn't have voted ordinarily. And do you know what? She had the nerve when we woke up when I said, right, it's time to get up and go and vote. What are you on about? So she tried to get out of it. So I've doubled my voting power by making her go or encouraging her to go. But the other thing is, we've had some new polling come out. This is national voting intention polling, right? National voting. I'm going to do a video on my own channel later on because this is really interesting. But just to point out, YouGov's latest poll has the Conservatives on 18%. 18%, record low. And this is after their big campaign. You know, Rishi Sunak over the last week and a bit, you know, he started off, he's been attacking the welfare budget, then he turned to the Rwanda plan, then it was more of the welfare budget, and it was Rwanda plan again. He's been jumping between his culture wars, right? Then there was something about the defence budget, and the result of it is that the Conservatives have now. You would expect maybe to lose a little bit of vote share because with local elections, stuff like that, unsurprisingly, the Lib Dems have gone up a bit. That's because the media have to report a little bit on what the Lib Dems are doing. Because during an election campaign, the media are obligated to spend a little bit of time talking to people according to their sort of political power, so to speak. So, you know, Lib Dems unsurprisingly gone up a bit, but Reform UK have jumped again. And again, I'm going to keep arguing. If Rishi Sunak keeps pushing these culture wars, it's only helping Reform UK. Because there's certain type of voter that it's intended to appeal to, look at the situation and go, so you're talking about the thing, you're talking about this thing, and then they're looking between the Conservatives and Reform UK, Conservatives and Reform UK. And they look at the Conservatives and what do they see? Years of failure by their own standards. They look at Reform UK, who say, we've got a better plan. It just needs a bit of backbone. They've got no record of failure because they've never had power. It's not going to work. So anyway, speaking of the Rwanda plan, should we catch up with the latest? So first of all, do you know what they say? Oh, quick super chat in there from Johnny Copperhead, £2, thank you. Says, happy, stick it to the Tories day. And that is it. Do you know what? The Tories are panicking today. I'm just going to throw this one in quickly before I get back into Rwanda. So Wes Streeting has been tweeting that a vote for Susan Hall in London today is a vote for Islamophobia and white supremacy, that sort of thing, right? And I've seen, you know, Tories and Tory shills and people in the right wing. I've seen a massive deluge of people. Oh, this is disgraceful tweet. It's immature. Oh, it's disgusting. Labour haven't changed at all. What a disgusting tweet. Wes Streeting, how dare you? How very dare you? And I don't know whether people have seen it in Byline. If you haven't, Google Byline Times Nick Arlott, right? Susan Hall, I mean, for a start, Susan Hall's got a bit of a past in terms of her social media content, right? A bit of the old white supremacy herself, yeah? But she's been actively out campaigning with someone called Nick Arlott. Nick Arlott is a white supremacist. He's a Tommy Robinson supporter. And I'm not saying he's a white supremacist because he's a Tommy Robinson supporter. Like Byline Times have produced various images he's been trying to promote on social media. One of them is old signs that say things like, we cater to white trade only. We serve coloured carry out only, right? He's also got Islamophobic posts and stuff like that. She's been campaigning side by side with him. So yeah, it's perfectly reasonable to support the notion that voting for Susan Hall is a vote for Islamophobia and white supremacy, because not only has she liked posts that express those views in the past, she's actively walking side by side with someone. There's a photo of her smiling in a hug with him, and on his t-shirt is a sort of an old World War II bomber, but the point is it's raining indiscriminate bombs. Like, who goes around with a t-shirt like that, particularly in the current climate? Anyway, back onto Rwanda, the other like crazy tourist scheme. And so James cleverly yesterday was saying, oh, now that we've got Rwanda flights in the air, oh, the Labour aren't smiling now, are they? And I'm thinking, well, actually, I think they probably are, because let me explain, for those who don't know, some people in the chat clearly do from your comments. For those who don't know, what has happened? So we've sent, actually, the Conservatives are saying we've sent an asylum seeker to Rwanda. That's not actually true. We've sent someone who claimed asylum in the UK to Rwanda. However, their asylum, by the way, they didn't arrive on a small boat, I gather from reports. They actually arrived via normal channels. Not that there are many of those. But anyway, their asylum application failed. So they're no longer an asylum seeker. They were an asylum seeker. They came to the UK seeking asylum. It's been rejected, right? According to the normal processes. At this point, the government are legally empowered to deport them. That's what should happen. This is why I keep saying things like the fact that the government stopped. The reason the small boats things happen is we cut out safe routes. And the reason why the backlog happened and all the hotels are needed for accommodation, because we allowed this backlog to grow. You know, we allowed, we stopped, they cut back the number of civil servants processing the claims. And the thing is, like, if you do that, you can't deport as many people, because anyone who fails their claim, you can deport them, perfectly legal. So this chap, who's from some part of Africa, I can't remember where. So the government were legally allowed to deport them. So what they've done is they've basically said to this guy, look, we're deporting you back to your home country. Or tell you what, let's do a deal. We will pay you £3,000 if you let us send you to Rwanda. At which point they can just then go back to their own country if that's what they want to do, or go where they like. They were being deported anyway. They were going to be flown to somewhere in Africa, right? Now, because they, have gone to Rwanda instead, they've got £3,000 in their pocket. That's what's actually happened. The idea of Rwanda flights in the air, no, they're not. It's one assignment. And how did they only find one? Because although the government have massively scaled back the dealing with applications, we are still dealing with some applications. We do still deport quite a few people every year who fail their applications, all perfectly legally. No issue from the courts at all, any court, right? It's all legal. And, so why couldn't could they only really get one person who was going to be deported anywhere to say, look, can we deport you somewhere slightly different and give you £3,000? Oh dear. Frederico Price saying they fly to Rwanda free with £3,000 pocket money plus 5 years of subsistence. And apparently this guy wasn't even in the UK. I didn't actually know that bit. I did know that they weren't a small boat crossing asylum seeker. So presumably they're held in like northern France or something then, if they're not even in the UK. But yeah, that's all it was. Absolute madness. Utterly insane. But anyway, the latest now. So in terms of where the Rwanda plan is, as Rishi Sunak would have it, so he's just passed his Rwanda Safety Act, right? Or whatever it's called now. I used to call it the Rwanda Safety Bill. It's not the full title of the legislation. I forget exactly, but that's what it became known as. So it's now in law. It's signed into law. So it's now an act of parliament. But this act of parliament doesn't really change the law pertaining to asylum seekers, because it hasn't changed the Human Rights Act, which is UK legislation. So it doesn't, we haven't changed our human rights laws. It doesn't change the European Convention on Human Rights, which is international law. It doesn't change the UN Refugee Convention, which is international law. So we haven't changed the law. What this Act of Parliament has done is allowed the government to ignore the courts. I don't know the details of exactly which courts they can ignore. The main focus was supposed to be the European Court of Human Rights. We will have to, until legal challenges are made, we do not yet know, because this Act of Parliament is so, with any Act of Parliament, usually it needs testing in the courts to know exactly what it means, right? Because most legislation doesn't mean what politicians say it means. And even when it, and sometimes that is because they are just lying, but mostly it's because they're not lawyers themselves, so they don't always know. They think it means a thing and it doesn't. So but all it does is it stops. It lets the government ignore the courts. It doesn't change the law. So civil servants are concerned they may be being asked to break the law in facilitating the Rwanda plan. It's all right, ministers not being subject to the courts. Well, civil servants have a duty not to break the law, and the ministerial code is really clear on that. A quick super chat in there. Ivan Ambrose, 499. Thank you. It says Sunak failed to answer the question in PMQs from Labour's Catherine West about Susan Hall's involvement with racist, xenophobic Facebook groups. Oh yeah, there was a report. I think this was in the Guardian that was talking about some of these Facebook pages. Absolutely abhorrent, really, genuinely abhorrent. And Wes Streeting has come back with that. But I just, the level, I mean, you just go onto Twitter. If you look at that post, if you look at Wes Streeting's post, it will then be, the algorithm will then think, oh, you're interested in this post. You will then get a deluge of right wingers of various stripes, including Richard Tice, all describing his tweet as absolutely outrageous. It's quite incredible. I've never seen the like. I mean, obviously you expect when, Labour tweets anything for Labour's opponents to jump on it and try and, but this is extraordinary. I've never seen the like. But yeah, there we go. So civil servants, which union is it actually? It's the FDA. So they are taking they're taking the matter to court, the High Court. What they want is for the court to prioritize this. Now, according to the BBC article, it doesn't suggest that the High Court necessarily will fast track this case. They should, because it's something that's actively going on now. The government have a timetable here. I think someone was reported Rishi Sunak reckons he can get flights in the air in June. It's like when I listened to the speech, I had to listen to the speech that he gave after his bill passed. And according to his own timetable, I added it up, he would be expecting flights in the air mid-July. The only way he could get them there any sooner is if the sort of legal process was much quicker. Whereas, if anything, it's actually much slower. And this could slow it down even further. Because if the High Court prioritize it and goes, yeah, there's something a bit dodgy here, they could sort of put the brakes on it. Now, at that point, of course, the government would be free to appeal to the Supreme Court. But the last time they did that did not go well for them. Now, obviously, we don't know, just because civil servants are taking the government to court and just because their case sounds reasonable, because we know that civil servants are effectively being asked to break the law. That is pretty much certain. What is not certain is, are those civil servants themselves in legal jeopardy for doing so? Because that will be, I'm not a legal expert, that I imagine is the crux of the argument. Because what civil servants don't want to do is to find themselves being prosecuted by a domestic or international court for facilitating this. It's all right, ministers effectively being immune from prosecution, assuming that is the case. But what about, and I said this, as soon as the Rishi Sunak announced his Rwanda bill, this idea of circumventing the courts, I said, well, it's all right, ministers being able to circumvent the court. What about, I said at the time, what about the civil servants who have to action it? What about the pilots of the plane? And the other air crew? Another Phil there saying, get leave to remain and stay in the UK, or fail and leave with £3,000 plus 5 years free accommodation. Great deterrent. The deterrent aspect is a complete nonsense at all. First of all, let us say that we really did have a plan to send anyone who arrives by small boat to Rwanda, which we don't, of course. Let us say that. Would that act as a deterrent? Not really, because who's going to tell them? The emphasis on small boats is often about the people smugglers who provide the boats. They're not going to tell them because they want their money. Who's going to tell them about this? No one. How many people know what the detailed asylum policies of a different country are. You don't. If you're fleeing, you're you know you're not up on all the details of the country you're fleeing to. You just know a few things about it, right? And and then let's say someone actually did tell them the truth about the Rwanda plan. What are they going to tell them? They're going to tell them, first of all, it only applies to people already in the UK because the government have a process at the moment. Anyone who arrives by small boat today just gets put into legal limbo. So they're not considered for the Rwanda plan. They're not considered for it. And then how many people are going to go to Rwanda? At the moment, they've got like one. They actually had a plane with one person on it, or one asylum seeker on it. Actually, given that it was probably just a commercial flight. I don't even know anything about the flight itself. It was given that they were going voluntarily with $3,000 in their back pocket. It was probably just a commercial flight they put them on. No security. Why would they need security? Just make sure they leave the government don't care what happens to them once they've left the UK. But anyway, can civil servants be allowed to use the Nuremberg trials as a precedent? So it's career or breaking the law with Whitehall rents. Can you afford to refuse? I mean, I won't know what the legal case is going to be, and I probably never will because I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to pay attention to the detail unless an actual lawyer that I follow on Twitter while it's still holding up explains it. But, the basic premise is civil servants do not want to find themselves in legal jeopardy. The FDA are clear in this article. They're not making a political judgment themselves on the rights or the wrongs of the Rwanda plan. They just do not want to break the ministerial code. Their argument is that the government cannot simply say, the ministerial code does not, you can't bypass it by simply saying, well, the minister told you to do it, so therefore it's all right. So it's interesting you mentioned the Nuremberg trials because, they're just trying to make sure, are we in legal jeopardy here? You would think they'd take the case itself to the European Court of Human Rights as well, because surely the High Court can only assess it based on English law, not international law. But interesting. In fact, a couple of people saying it was a commercial flight. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It made no sense to pay for a dedicated flight to send one person, particularly when they're going voluntarily. And as I say, why wouldn't they? It's like, if you're told, if you've come from somewhere and, and you've been told, like, we're going to deport you, you've got no legal right to stay here. And that's true. And they're going to deport you anyway. For $3,000, of course, they'll let you deport somewhere else. You could just pay for the flight to wherever you actually were going to go to, and you've still got money left over. They could use Lord Cameron's plane. That would be pricey. 42 million quid. Yeah. He's a I mean, it's quite funny. David Cameron is often considered, like, by the standards of the current government, it's almost like a lot of people, particularly in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, were like breathing a sigh of relief because at last, for the first time in many, many years, they actually have someone credible running the department. And yet he's still as sleazy as all the rest of them, isn't he? Still as sleazy. Luxury. I mean, you can understand he needs a private plane. He's the foreign secretary. There's a lot going on. He's got to go here, there, and everywhere. Okay, fine. He's not going to travel by British Airways business class. We get that. But a luxury plane. It just needs to be like all private planes are all right. Let's be honest. They're all comfortable. For goodness sake, though, the piss taking is epic. And the thing as well, it invites journalists who want to talk about it to then keep poking at his Greensill affairs as well. Because we have to remember that's never been resolved. Now that he's a member of Parliament, he's a member of the House of Lords, he's supposed to have his finances, scrutinised a bit more carefully. Could they try to take it to an international court after afterwards, after they've dragged it through the local courts, maybe drag the issue out until the tours get thrown out. I honestly don't know. I see no reason why you couldn't take it to both courts at once. The emphasis in the BBC article, and indeed the iNews, because I was alerted to it by browsing the front page of the newspapers. It's on the iNews front page today. UK Rwanda plan could be delayed as civil servants sue government. But I saw it for the first time in terms of the article on the BBC. But yeah. What happened to the plane Boris had painted? Oh, I don't even know. I mean, it was an RAF plane. It was so it wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't a plane that the government commissioned for its own use. So presumably it's just used for whatever the RAF were using it for. It just has different livery now. Why can't he just get a commercial plane? Is he afraid he might have to explain himself to the electorate on board? What, David Cameron? Well, it sort of is commercial. I mean, we haven't bought the plane. We're hiring it, presumably for a pretty penny. We'll find out later. But no, I mean, in all honesty, you can't have the foreign secretary on like a chartered, like, on like a plane that would just have other members of the public there, because they're having confidential discussion. I mean, there's security apart from anything else, but you can probably manage security. But they are, I mean, for a start, airports tend to have quite good security anyway. They don't let people onto planes with guns and knives. But you also are having very confidential conversations with people. So you can't. You have to have a private plane, for very senior government ministers out on when they're on official business. It's different if they're obviously just going on holiday or something. But if they're on official business, they have meetings. It does need to be a private plane. It does not need to be the most expensive private plane you can find. It just needs to be secure. It needs to have the right facilities to hold confidential meetings and to get him from one airport to another. That is it. The Rwanda plan only applies to England and Wales. Well, it's more that the officials are all based in Whitehall. It's not that it only applies to England and Wales, although I think all the asylum seekers are based in England and Wales anyway. Apart from anything else, so you may have seen earlier this week, yesterday or the day before, the police going out detaining a load of these asylum seekers. Now, what was particularly unpleasant about it was the fact that they're showing off these photos, for their local elections. There's nothing illegal about the detentions. If someone is earmarked for deportation, it is normal practice to detain them. Because do you know what? People don't like being deported, so they will generally flee. I mean, they've already fled to this country. So, yeah, they'll just... And a load of them already have, apparently. So the government already have lost about half the people they were trying to detain, I gather from a report, but I'm not sure where that was. So it's fine to detain. Well, in theory, it's fine to detain them. Not so much to post the pictures. However, had any of these asylum seekers been based in Scotland, I can't imagine that the Scottish government would have allowed Police Scotland to have detained them like that, and certainly not published photos. So, yeah, I think all of these... But the reason why they'll be taking it to the English High Court is because all of these civil servants are based in Whitehall, therefore London, therefore England. So I don't think this court case isn't about the asylum seekers. Doesn't matter where they're based. It's not about the asylum seekers. It's about the officials who are having to... Because remember, ministers don't actually do anything. They don't do anything. They don't process any of this. They don't do any of the detentions. They don't fly anyone anywhere. They just order things. Other people have to actually carry out those orders. And because all of those people are based in London, it's the English High Court, first of all. It may then, as I say, if there's an appeal, go to the Supreme Court. They say Irish ministers often travel on scheduled flights, especially to Brussels, where flights no longer have business class. If they're not having top-level meetings, that's fine. But, the Foreign Secretary is having a lot of confidential meetings with people you cannot have. You cannot have ordinary members of the public out there. So I get that. I'm not saying any minister traveling for any reason needs a private plane, but I am saying that, you know, when it's the Prime Minister or Foreign Secretary or someone like that, and they are going to be having top level meetings and briefings, it needs to be private. People being rounded up reminded me of Jews being rounded up by the Gestapo. I mean, it shouldn't. It's the fact that they were publicising it that is beyond the pale. I mean, you could also say because it's related to the Rwanda plan, then the detention shouldn't be happening anyway because the Rwanda plan is unlawful, right? The Supreme Court have said so. Nothing the government have done has changed that. If the government wanted it to be lawful, they would change the Human Rights Act, they would withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, and they would withdraw from the UN Convention. So all this nonsense about, oh, it's the will of Parliament, it's the will of Parliament. No, it's not the will of Parliament, because Parliament has determined that we should remain, that the Human Rights Act should remain exactly as it is, that we should remain part of the European Convention on Human Rights, and that we should remain a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention. Westminster Parliament has the power to get rid of all those three things, and it hasn't done. So the will of Parliament is that we are still obliged to the Refugee Convention, European Convention on Human Rights, and the Human Rights Act, which is sort of largely the same thing. So yeah, it's not the will of Parliament that these people go to Rwanda at all. Absolute rubbish. All Parliament can be determined to want is for us to ignore the law every now and then. Jess just saying back from the poll station. Yes, hopefully anyone who hasn't been to the polling station but who has an election today, which may not be all of you, hopefully you get off quite soon. Don't wait for everyone to come back and queue up after work. Although depending on where you are, there may or may not be queues. Where I am, there's never going to be a queue all day long. I went first thing because I always go first thing. Apart from anything else, it's going to be quite warm today. But it's only a PCC election where I am, so there'll never be a queue. But there may be where you are, so, you know, do it early. David Faulkner, 38 Hong Kong dollars. Thank you very much. One of the very few that speaks with intelligence and wisdom. I'm sure that's not true, but you could be forgiven for thinking so if you spend a lot of time listening to gobshites on the news. But there we go. Other people just reporting they've just got back from the polling stations as well. Good. Particularly, as I say, in the London area, because the right wing are going super mad. They, you know, the latest polling shows that Sadiq Khan should win comfortably. But I would just caution people, the government have changed the way the election works. It's now first past the post. So if you've got a load of people thinking, oh, well, Sadiq Khan's going to win anyway, he doesn't need my vote, and you vote for someone else, don't risk it. The other thing is, well, we don't know the impact of voter ID. Some people are going to get turned away. We know that the majority of people turned away are going to be people who are not voting Conservative, right? The Electoral Commission identified the people who were mostly being denied their vote last year's local elections, and it's basically a who's who of people who vote Labour. So yeah, don't take anything for granted at all. It's always important to vote. Admittedly, it's not always important to vote tactically, but I think this year, anyone who's willing to vote tactically, I think this year is the most important year I can remember in my lifetime. I mean, there was a lot of tactical voting going on in 1997. But I would suggest, for two reasons, there's a heightened level of importance this year. First of all, the Tories are way, way worse. And like even the Tories that don't exist, like Susan Hall, she's not actually in power. She's mental. I cannot emphasize enough. I have a very dim view of the Conservatives. I do not know how she ever became the Conservative candidate. She's nuts. Like she's like Liz Truss level of nuts, but without any of the redeeming features that I can assess. But just in general, it's the Conservatives are actually on for a hiding. Now, we don't know what dirty tactics they're going to pull in the general election itself. We know they've been harvesting personal details. We know they've been changing the law so that they can target people during an election campaign, because it's generally illegal to have targeted political messages to people. The Cambridge Analytica thing, for example, was illegal. I can't emphasize that enough. The government are making it legal for them to do it during an election campaign. So they're going to go full Cambridge Analytica on the population when the general election starts. And we don't know what impact that will have. So again, we cannot afford to be apathetic here. But the potential exists to completely destroy the Conservative Party. So there it is. And so just final comment here from Esfats, who's of course in Ukraine. Even in countries where head of state is elected, most use a two-round system where if no candidate gets 50% of votes, top two candidates compete again. We elect mayors this way as well. Yeah, I mean, it's there's a huge democratic deficit for example, the UK and the US. So no surprise that of the major economies of the world, ours are the most politically screwed up, because our system for electing politicians does not take account of like public opinion strongly enough. But there it is anyway. We'll run out of time again. Have a good day. Don't forget to go and vote if you're able to. And even if you have voted, don't forget to badger others into voting who can't be asked, because they do need badgering. Offer them a cream bun or something if they go and vote. But there we go. Thanks very much for coming on. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget your voter ID if you're going to vote or telling someone else to go and vote. Thanks for coming on, and until next time, I'll see you later.